Fight or Flight, an Overview of Crisis Theory by Courtney Brooks, Danielle Hudson, Katerina Christen, and Amy Rourke. Crisis theory is the framework for defining and explaining phenomenon that occur when a person faces a problem that seems unsolvable. Some key concepts that are found in the text are crisis, crisis intervention, fight or flight, coping, chronic stress, precipitating event, and prevention. A crisis is an event that leads to a temporary state of psychological disorganization or inability to function. A crisis intervention is a short-term intervention that focuses on returning a person to previous levels of functioning after experiencing a crisis. Fight or flight is an automatic psychological response that leads a person to flee a stressful situation or to stand in self-defense. Coping is healthy or unhealthy choices people make in an attempt to relieve the stress brought on by a crisis. Chronic stress is experiencing a high level of anxiety for an extended period, which can lead to physiological changes such as high blood pressure or ulcers. Precipitating event is a stressful event that prompts the fight or flight response. And lastly, prevention, attempts to avoid the occurrence of traumatic event. Practice principles for crisis theory is that it is time-limited and short-term. The engagement and assessment occur simultaneously and efficiently. A fundamental purpose of crisis intervention is to meet concrete and emotional needs through the provision of services. And lastly, crisis intervention must move quickly, seeking to help a client return to a previous level of functioning.
One of the most widely used models of crisis intervention is Roberts' 7-stage model. This model outlines a protocol that professionals can use as they intervene with clients in crisis-type situations. Each stage of this model is task-specific, and the stages require a wide variety of skills in social work practice. The 7 stages include planning and conducting thorough biopsychosocial assessments, making psychological contact and rapidly establishing the collaborative relationship, identifying the major problems including crisis precipitation, encourage an exploration of feelings and emotions, generating and exploring alternative and new coping strategies, restoring function through implementation of an action plan, and plan follow-up and booster sessions. Stage 1 is where workers quickly define and assess the crisis situation by using artful interviewing styles. Workers should ask questions that assist in assessing the situation and the lethality level. During the assessment stage, workers should at least cover environmental support and stressors, medical needs and medications, and internal and external coping methods. Stage 2 is where the worker rapidly establishes rapport with the clients. In order to rapidly establish this rapport, workers must display certain characteristics such as genuineness, respect, and acceptance. This is also where traits, behaviors, and fundamental strengths of the worker come into play in order to build trust and confidence. Some of these prominent strengths are good eye contact, a non-judgmental attitude, creativity, flexibility, a positive mental attitude, and reinforcing small steps and gains. Stage 3 involves identifying the major problem in the crisis precipitant. Crisis intervention focuses on the problem at hand, which is usually the event that precipitated the crisis. Workers are interested in the events that led up to the crisis, which can often be defined by asking a variety of why now questions. During this stage, it is also important for workers to prioritize problems and work on the most imminent ones first. There are 2 aspects to Stage 4, which deals with feelings and emotions. During this stage, workers allow individuals to express their feelings, vent their frustration, and explain their story about the current situation. This can be achieved by utilizing active listening skills, which involve paraphrasing, reflecting on feelings, and asking probing questions. The next aspect of this stage is working in challenge responses into the dialogue, which can help to undo maladaptive thinking and to consider other options. Challenge responses include giving information, reframing, interpretation, and also playing devil's advocate. Stage 5 involves generating and exploring alternatives. This is often the most difficult stage to establish in crisis intervention. Individuals in crisis lack the ability to see the big picture and tend to cling to familiar ways of coping, even if they are maladaptive. However, if stage 4 has been successfully achieved, some emotional balance has been restored and established. It is important that exploring alternatives should be a collaborative effort. When alternatives have been defined and reestablished, the client should own these, which helps them to feel a sense of control for their circumstances. It's often helpful to apply solutions-focused therapy techniques. These are highly useful during stage 5 and should be integrated into this intervention process. Implementation of an action plan is achieved during stage 6. During this stage, workers and clients operationalize strategies that have previously been defined in earlier stages. During this process, it's important to also define barriers and strengths of the client as well as current resources. Implementing an action plan helps to restore functioning, which can be achieved by answering why this crisis happened. Understanding the meaning of an event is important to gain control over the crisis and other crises that could happen in the future. Workers should plan to follow up with clients after the initial intervention to ensure that crisis was effectively resolved. The post-crisis evaluation includes assessing physical conditions such as the individual's sleep and nutrition, and overall functioning that includes social, emotional, and spiritual. It also includes ensuring that the client has a better understanding of the crisis, they're satisfied with ongoing treatment, and they are able to define any stressors that may be affecting their progress. Workers should also follow up to see if there are any other referrals that should be made, such as legal help, housing, or medical services.
Like every theory, crisis theory has strengths that come along with it. Some of these strengths include the ability to be used in almost any crisis situation a social worker would face. Crisis intervention provides immediate help rather than being put on a wait list or needing to be put into emergency services. Crisis intervention also allows for the flexibility of the stages within the crisis intervention for the adaptation of the culture of the client to be incorporated. This provides better care and more quality care for the client and the ability to learn about their culture to utilize more appropriate measures to make sure that they get appropriate care. Crisis intervention also helps prevent higher level of care for clients as the service is immediate and handles the crisis at the beginning rather than having it escalate to a point where it needs a higher level service. With that comes a lesser need of hospitalization, which in turn creates a lower cost to the client and to their insurance policyholders or the system. Lastly, crisis interventions can be utilized in groups after large disasters, not just on a single person basis. And these disasters can be natural, such as the hurricanes we are currently experiencing in the U.S., or otherwise, such as terrorist attacks or other large-scale events.
One of the first limitations of crisis theory is that sometimes there's a misconception between someone in actual crisis versus someone experiencing psychological distress. Someone in psychological distress would need immediate intervention versus someone in crisis who could potentially wait 1 to 3 days for that service. Another limitation is that there's no known knowledge about the client prior to that crisis. So there could be relevant medical information, for instance, that would not be included in that intervention. There's also a lack of coordination with follow-up services with crisis intervention. Crisis intervention prides itself on restoring that client back to their pre-crisis state. However, sometimes that client could benefit from additional services, and there could be a better follow-up method with crisis theory. Langer and Litz sum it up by saying, at the point of intervention, a number of methods may be used. This may make it more difficult to measure the effectiveness of the model versus the effectiveness of the intervention modality, meaning that at the end of the day, it's unknown whether crisis intervention itself is beneficial or if any intervention during a crisis is beneficial.